The rain pounded against the windshield in heavy sheets, distorting the bright red and blue emergency lights that flashed through the night. Inside the speeding car, Michael Parker gripped the steering wheel with white-knuckle desperation while Sarah sat in the passenger seat, her hands trembling as she stroked the damp fur of the Border Collie lying still in her lap. "Just hold on, Max," she whispered, her voice breaking. In the back seat, Lily clutched her stuffed rabbit to her chest, tears streaming silently down her face. Ethan, sitting beside her, stared straight ahead, his jaw tight as he struggled to contain his own emotions. The air inside the car was thick with the scent of wet fur and something far worse, the metallic tang of sickness that no amount of rain could wash away. As they screeched to a halt in front of Northwood Animal Hospital, Michael barely put the car in park before jumping out. He yanked open the back door, and with Ethan's help, carefully lifted Max from Sarah's lap. The dog barely moved, his once lively brown eyes dull and unfocused. Dr. Chambers, the family's longtime veterinarian, was already waiting at the entrance, her expression grave. "Bring him inside. Quickly." The clinic was quiet at this late hour, the fluorescent lights casting an eerie glow over the sterile white walls. As they carried Max to the examination table, Sarah let out a quiet sob. Lily clung to her arm, burying her face against her mother's coat. Dr. Chambers worked in silence, running her hands over Max's frail body, checking his vitals, her eyes flickering with an emotion she tried to suppress. Then, after what felt like an eternity, she let out a slow breath and looked up at them. Michael knew that look. He had seen it before, when his own father had been diagnosed with terminal cancer. "I'm so sorry," Dr. Chambers said softly. "His organs are shutting down. There's nothing more we can do." A sharp, strangled gasp escaped Sarah's lips. Lily shook her head violently, backing away from the table as if distance could somehow change the truth. "No. No, you can do something. Give him medicine, do surgery." Ethan's voice was edged with anger, desperation. "You're supposed to save him." Dr. Chambers' expression remained kind but firm. "Max is in pain, Ethan. The kind that medicine won't fix. The kind that doesn't get better." Michael swallowed hard, placing a steadying hand on his son's shoulder. "What are our options?" Dr. Chambers hesitated before answering. "We can make him comfortable for a few more hours, but he'll suffer. Or we can help him pass peacefully." The room fell silent except for the sound of Lily's quiet, hitching breaths. Finally, Sarah nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks. "We won't let him suffer." Dr. Chambers nodded solemnly. "I'll give you a few minutes." The Parkers gathered around Max, stroking his fur, whispering their goodbyes. "You were the best boy," Michael murmured, his voice thick. "I love you," Lily choked out, pressing a trembling kiss to his forehead. Ethan, unable to speak, simply rested his head against Max's side, feeling the slow, labored rise and fall of his breathing. When Dr. Chambers returned, syringe in hand, the finality of it settled like lead in their chests. Minutes later, Max took his last breath, his body stilling as the storm raged on outside. The Parkers left the clinic with empty arms and shattered hearts, knowing that nothing would ever quite fill the space Max had left behind. A year had passed since that night. The Parker household was quieter now, almost too quiet. The absence of Max was a hollow space that no one spoke about, but it lingered in every corner of their home. His empty bed remained untouched in the laundry room, his leash still hanging by the door, gathering dust. The once cheerful morning routine, where Max would nudge Michael awake, bark for his breakfast, and chase after Lily's school bus, had been replaced by an unspoken emptiness. Lily, now 10, had stopped asking for another dog months ago. She still whispered goodnight to Max's framed photo on her nightstand, but she no longer begged her parents to bring home a new puppy. Ethan, now 16, kept himself busy with soccer practice, never admitting how much he missed their old companion. Sarah found herself staring at the backyard sometimes, her eyes unconsciously drifting to the small gravestone they had placed beneath the maple tree. Then one evening, as they sat down for dinner, Michael cleared his throat. "I think it's time," he said. Sarah looked up from her plate. Time for what? Michael hesitated, glancing at Ethan and Lily before continuing. Time to consider getting another dog. The room fell into a heavy silence. Lily immediately pushed her chair back, shaking her head. No. We don't need another dog. Her voice was small but firm. Max was our dog. I'm not saying we replace Max, Michael said gently. I just think, maybe we have space in our hearts for another. Ethan stabbed his fork into his mashed potatoes, his jaw tightening. It wouldn't be the same. Sarah sighed, placing a hand on Michael's. Maybe we could just look? Lily said nothing. The next weekend, despite Lily's resistance, the family made a trip to Bright Haven Animal Shelter. The building smelled of disinfectant and damp fur. The sounds of barking echoed through the hallways as they walked past row after row of hopeful eyes. Some dogs wagged their tails eagerly, while others cowered in corners. Sarah and Michael exchanged hesitant glances, unsure of what they were looking for. Ethan stood with his arms crossed, scanning the cages with little interest. Then, at the far end of the shelter, a quiet, medium-sized Border Collie sat calmly in his enclosure. His fur was black and white, just like Max's. His ears perked up at their approach, and his brown eyes, warm and intelligent, locked onto Lily's. The little girl froze. The dog slowly stood, his tail swaying once, twice. Sarah leaned in to read the name on the kennel door. Buddy. The shelter volunteer smiled. He's a sweetheart. Rescued a few weeks ago. He's been waiting for the right family. Michael knelt in front of the cage, watching as Buddy tilted his head in curiosity. Then, without hesitation, Buddy stepped forward and licked Lily's outstretched fingers. Lily's breath hitched. She stared at the dog for a long moment before whispering, "Max used to do that." No one said a word, but they all felt the same thing. It wasn't just coincidence. It was something more. The Parker family brought Buddy home that evening. Despite Ethan's lingering skepticism and Lily's hesitation, there was an undeniable connection forming. As soon as they walked through the front door, Buddy trotted in like he had always belonged there. He sniffed around, taking in every corner of the house, but what struck them the most was how he moved with a certain familiarity. Michael set down Buddy's leash and turned to Sarah. "He seems comfortable already," he remarked. Sarah nodded but remained quiet. Something about the way Buddy knew his way around unsettled her. It wasn't long before the peculiarities started. The first oddity happened the very next morning. 6:45 a.m. sharp. Michael woke up to a soft scratching at the back door, the same door Max had always scratched when he needed to go outside. Michael blinked at the clock in confusion. "Max always did that," Sarah murmured sleepily beside him, rubbing her eyes. Shaking off the feeling, Michael got up and opened the door. Buddy sprinted out, making a beeline for Max's favorite tree. He sniffed around, lifted his leg, then sat in the exact same spot Max used to claim as his own. Michael tried to brush it off as coincidence. But then it happened again. At precisely 4:30 p.m., Buddy positioned himself by the front window, staring down the road. His tail wagged slightly, his ears perked in anticipation. "What's he waiting for?" Ethan asked, watching the dog curiously. Sarah exchanged a glance with Michael. "That's where Max always sat around this time," she said. "He used to wait for the mailman." A minute later, as if on cue, the mail truck rolled into view. Buddy tensed, let out a sharp bark, and rushed to the door, exactly like Max had done every single day. Ethan furrowed his brow. "Okay, that's weird." Lily, standing a few feet away, was completely silent. As the days went on, the similarities only grew stronger. Buddy knew things he shouldn't have known. One evening, Sarah was washing dishes when she glanced out the kitchen window. She gasped. Buddy was standing at the far end of the backyard, right in front of Max's grave. He wasn't sniffing or digging. He just stood there, staring at it. Sarah dried her hands quickly and stepped outside. "Buddy?" The dog turned his head slightly, looking at her with an expression that sent a chill down her spine. It wasn't confusion. It wasn't curiosity. It was recognition. The same, quiet recognition Max had given her 1,000 times before. Sarah swallowed hard. "Come inside, boy." Buddy hesitated, then trotted toward her, pressing his nose against her leg, just like Max used to do whenever she was upset. Sarah reached down, stroking his soft fur, her heart pounding. That night, as they all sat in the living room, Lily suddenly broke the silence. "It's him," she whispered. Michael looked up from his book. "What?" Lily's voice was steady, despite the tears pooling in her eyes. "Buddy is Max." Ethan let out a short laugh. "That's ridiculous." Lily shook her head. "No, it's not. He scratches the door at the same time. He barks at the mailman just like Max. He even sleeps in Max's old bed. He knows things he shouldn't know." Sarah and Michael exchanged a look. They wanted to deny it, but they couldn't. Buddy lay curled at Lily's feet, watching them with those deep brown eyes. "Dogs are creatures of habit," Ethan said, trying to rationalize. "Maybe he's just following patterns. Maybe he senses Max's scent around the house." Lily's voice rose. "Then how did he know where Max was buried?" The question hung in the air. Ethan had no answer. Buddy lifted his head, his ears twitching, as if he understood every word. That night, for the first time in a long time, Lily slept peacefully, because deep down, she knew. Max had found his way home. The tension in the Parker household grew with every passing day. Lily was convinced that Buddy was Max, while Ethan refused to believe it. Their parents, caught somewhere between doubt and acceptance, tiptoed around the subject, unsure of what to say. It all came to a breaking point one Saturday afternoon. Ethan sat on the couch, scrolling through his phone while Lily played on the floor with Buddy. She tossed a tennis ball across the room, and Buddy dashed after it. But instead of returning it to her, he trotted over to Ethan and dropped the ball into his lap. Ethan froze. Lily gasped. "That's what Max always did," Sarah finished in a whisper. Ethan stared down at the dog, his mind racing. Max had always played fetch this way, never bringing the ball back to the thrower, but instead to Ethan, as if playing his own version of the game. "It's just a coincidence," Ethan muttered, throwing the ball aside. But Buddy didn't chase after it. Instead, he nudged Ethan's knee with his nose, the same way Max used to when he wanted attention. "Ethan," Michael said gently, "you have to admit, it's a little strange." No, Ethan shot up from the couch, his face flushed. "This is crazy. You guys are acting like ghosts are real. Like dogs come back from the dead. It's not possible." Lily's eyes welled up. "Why won't you believe it?" "Because it's not real, Lily," he snapped. "You're just seeing what you want to see. Buddy is just a dog, he's not Max." Lily flinched as if he had slapped her. Sarah placed a hand on Ethan's arm. "Honey, no one's saying he is Max. We don't have an explanation for this." "There is an explanation," Ethan said through gritted teeth. "You guys are just refusing to see it. Buddy probably grew up in a home with a routine similar to Max's. Maybe he was trained the same way. Maybe he's just similar. That's all." Lily shook her head violently. "No. You don't get it. You don't want to get it." Ethan scoffed. "Lily, you were a little kid when we got Max. You don't even remember half the things you think you do. You're just making things up." Lily's face turned red, her small hands clenching into fists. "You're wrong. I know it's him. Why can't you just believe me?" "Because it's impossible." Silence fell over the room. Buddy, who had been watching quietly, suddenly whined and walked to Lily's side, nudging her gently. She dropped to her knees, wrapping her arms around his neck, silent tears running down her face. Michael sighed, rubbing his temples. "Ethan, look." No, Ethan shook his head, stepping away. You guys can believe whatever you want. But I refuse to sit here and pretend that this," he gestured toward Buddy, "is something supernatural." With that, he turned and stormed out of the house. That night, Ethan lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling. His parents had tried to talk to him at dinner, but he had refused to engage. He wasn't going to buy into some fantasy. He knew dogs had habits. He knew that sometimes, people saw what they wanted to see. So why did it bother him so much? He turned onto his side, thinking back to the moment Buddy dropped the ball in his lap. That was something Max had done every single time they played. Could it really be just a coincidence? Ethan sighed, running a hand through his hair. He needed proof, real proof, that Buddy was just an ordinary dog. And he had an idea. The next morning, before anyone else was awake, Ethan grabbed a flashlight and quietly climbed the attic stairs. The attic was filled with old storage boxes, dusty furniture, and forgotten memories. Ethan stepped carefully over a pile of books and headed straight for the farthest corner, where an old wooden chest sat against the wall. Inside was a box labeled Max's Things. Ethan pulled it open, his fingers brushing against old leashes, collars, and chew toys. Then, near the bottom of the box, he found what he was looking for, Max's favorite stuffed lion. He smiled faintly. Max had loved this toy. He used to sleep with it every night. Ethan carefully closed the box, tucked the lion under his arm, and climbed back down. Buddy was lying on the couch when Ethan returned. "All right, let's see how much you really know," Ethan muttered. He held up the lion and said, "Buddy, where's Max's favorite toy?" Buddy lifted his head. His ears twitched. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, slowly, Buddy climbed down from the couch. He walked past Ethan and headed straight toward the hallway. Ethan followed, his heart pounding. Buddy made his way to Ethan's bedroom door. Then, with no hesitation, he pawed at it. Ethan's breath caught. That was the place where Max used to hide his favorite toy whenever he wanted to keep it away from Lily. Buddy had never been inside Ethan's room. He had never seen that spot before. And yet, he knew. Ethan stood frozen in the hallway, staring at the dog, his mind struggling to process what he had just witnessed. His hands trembled. Maybe Lily wasn't wrong. Maybe, just maybe, Max had really come back. Ethan stood frozen in the hallway, staring at Buddy, his heart pounding so loudly he could hear it in his ears. The stuffed lion lay limp in his hands, its worn fur still smelling faintly of the past. He had hidden this toy in his room for years, long after Max was gone. There was no way Buddy could have known about it. And yet, here he was, standing at the exact spot where Max used to hide his favorite toy. Ethan took a slow step forward. "How did you know that?" he whispered, his throat suddenly dry. Buddy wagged his tail and let out a small, familiar huff, the exact sound Max used to make when he was proud of himself. Ethan swallowed hard. No. This doesn't prove anything. He was grasping for logic, but doubt had begun to claw at his mind. He needed more proof. Something undeniable. Determined, he turned back toward the attic. He would find something only Max could recognize. A few minutes later, Ethan stood in the living room, a small silver whistle in his palm. This whistle was different from an ordinary dog whistle. It had a specific pitch that Max had been trained to respond to, a game Ethan had played with him for years. Max had been the only dog who ever reacted to it. Ethan took a deep breath, watching Buddy closely. His parents and Lily were still asleep, so this was his moment. He lifted the whistle to his lips and blew. The sound was silent to human ears, but the reaction from Buddy was instantaneous. The dog's head snapped up, eyes alert. He jumped onto all fours and ran to Ethan's feet, sitting at perfect attention. Just like Max had always done. Ethan's hands trembled. "No way," he whispered. He blew the whistle again. "Buddy, no," Max barked once, tail wagging, eyes locked onto Ethan as if waiting for a command. Ethan felt his chest tighten. His vision blurred. This was impossible. It had to be. And yet, There was no denying it now. Max was here. Not just in memory. Not just in spirit. He had truly, somehow, come back. A lump formed in Ethan's throat. He dropped to his knees, wrapping his arms around Buddy, his entire body shaking. "I'm sorry," he whispered into the dog's fur. "I should have believed. I should have known." Buddy, Max, licked Ethan's cheek, his tail wagging wildly. For the first time since Max's passing, Ethan finally let himself cry. And in that moment, all doubt was gone. Max had come home. Ethan sat on the living room floor, his arms still wrapped tightly around Buddy. No, Max. The weight of everything he had denied, everything he had refused to believe, pressed against his chest like an invisible force. Buddy had responded to the whistle. He had found the hidden toy. He had displayed every single habit Max had before. But there was still one last question. How far did this connection go? Ethan wiped his face quickly, sniffing as he pulled away. Buddy sat in front of him, his tail wagging gently, his eyes locked onto Ethan's with the same deep understanding Max had always possessed. Ethan hesitated before whispering, "Where's your ball?" It was a test, a challenge. Max had one prized possession that he had always treasured above all else, his red rubber ball. The very same ball the family had buried with him in the backyard a year ago. There was no way Buddy could know about it. And yet, without hesitation, Buddy stood up. Ethan's breath caught in his throat as the dog padded over to the sliding glass door and scratched at it, just like Max used to when he wanted to go outside. Ethan shakily got to his feet and slid the door open. The early morning air was cool, the grass damp with dew. The sky was painted with soft hues of pink and orange as the sun began to rise. Buddy trotted outside, moving with purpose. Ethan followed. His heart pounded harder with each step as he realized exactly where the dog was going. Straight to Max's grave. Ethan froze as Buddy stopped right in front of the small mound of earth beneath the old maple tree. The engraved stone bearing Max's name sat untouched, a silent tribute to the dog they had lost. Buddy began digging. Ethan felt his stomach drop. No way. Dirt flew into the air as Buddy's paws worked furiously, his determination unwavering. By the time Ethan stepped closer, his breath caught. There, half buried beneath the damp soil, lay Max's red rubber ball. Ethan's knees nearly gave out. Buddy stopped digging and nudged the ball free, before turning to Ethan, his tail wagging slightly, almost proudly. Ethan swallowed, his throat tight. "This is impossible," he whispered. Buddy picked up the ball in his mouth and trotted over, dropping it at Ethan's feet. Ethan's hands trembled as he picked it up. It was the same ball. The one they had buried with Max. The one that should have been 6 feet underground. Ethan squeezed his eyes shut. It was real. It was all real. Max hadn't just come back. He had never truly left. Ethan exhaled a shaky breath before reaching out, ruffling Buddy's fur. "Welcome home, Max." And for the first time in a year, Ethan finally believed. Ethan stood in the backyard, gripping the red rubber ball in his trembling hands. The weight of what had just happened settled deep in his chest. He turned to look at Buddy, no, Max, who sat in the damp grass, his tail wagging gently, his brown eyes filled with quiet understanding. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then Ethan whispered, "You really came back, didn't you?" Max didn't bark or jump in excitement. He simply stared at Ethan with the same calm patience he had always possessed. It was as if he had been waiting for him to finally understand. Ethan took a shaky breath before stepping forward and kneeling beside him. He reached out, running his fingers through the familiar softness of his black and white fur. "I was so stupid," Ethan choked. "I should have known. I should have believed Lily." At the mention of her name, a soft voice called from behind them. "Ethan?" Ethan turned sharply to see Lily standing at the back door, her pajama sleeves covering her small hands. Her face was filled with confusion, then curiosity, then hope. "Why are you outside?" she asked, stepping forward. Ethan hesitated. He looked at Max, who tilted his head, his tail wagging a little harder now. Ethan didn't hesitate this time. He believed now. "Lily," he said, voice steady. "You were right. The whole time." Lily's eyes widened. "What?" Ethan turned back to Max, running a hand down his back. "It's him," he said. "It's really Max." Lily gasped, covering her mouth. "You believe me?" Ethan nodded. Lily dropped to her knees beside them, wrapping her arms around Max's neck. Tears streamed down her cheeks as she whispered, "Max, you found us again." Max licked her cheek, pressing his nose into her hair, just as he had done 100 times before. Sarah and Michael appeared at the doorway, looking confused. "What's going on?" Michael asked, rubbing his face sleepily. Ethan stood up, holding the red ball in his palm. He walked over and held it out to them. "He dug this up," Ethan said, his voice quiet but firm. Sarah frowned, looking at the ball. "Okay. And?" Ethan swallowed. "We buried it with Max." Silence. Michael's brow furrowed as he stepped closer, taking the ball from Ethan's hand. It was dirty, damp, and unmistakably the same toy Max had cherished his whole life. His eyes flickered to Buddy, who had stopped pretending, who was now simply Max. Sarah's breath caught in her throat as realization dawned. "Oh my God." Michael shook his head in disbelief, looking down at Max. "No way." Max stood up and trotted over to them. He pressed his nose against Michael's leg, just like he used to when asking for belly rubs. Michael sank to his knees, running a hand through his hair. "Jesus Christ," he whispered. "It's really him." Sarah let out a quiet sob, pressing her hands to her mouth. Max whined softly and nudged her knee. And just like that, just like before, they were whole again. 1 year later, the Parker family no longer spoke of Buddy. He had become Max again. There was no doubt, no hesitation, just quiet acceptance that some souls never truly leave. The crisp autumn breeze rustled through the golden leaves as the family piled into their SUV. Today was a special day, Max's gotcha day, as Lily called it. Even though they had adopted him a year ago, it wasn't an adoption in their eyes. It was a homecoming. They pulled up to Evergreen Park, Max's favorite place in the world, where they had spent years bringing him as a puppy, long before any of them had believed in miracles. As soon as the car door opened, Max leaped out, barking excitedly. He knew this place. He knew exactly where to go. Lily laughed as she ran after him. "Wait for me, Max." Ethan followed, hands in his pockets, watching as his sister and the dog tore across the grass. A year ago, he would have rolled his eyes. A year ago, he would have called it coincidence. But now? Now, he just smiled. Sarah and Michael walked behind them, their hands intertwined. "I still can't explain it," Michael admitted quietly. Sarah exhaled, watching Max chase after Lily's outstretched arms. "Maybe we don't have to." Michael chuckled. "You? Accepting something without needing an explanation?" She smirked. "Miracles change people." They reached the old oak tree near the park center. Max skidded to a stop, wagging his tail as he stared up at its towering branches. Ethan furrowed his brow. Why'd he stop? Lily knelt beside Max, rubbing his ears. "What is it, buddy?" Max suddenly dug his paws into the dirt, his body wriggling with excitement. The family exchanged glances. "No way," Ethan murmured. Max pawed at something, pushing away a thin layer of earth. Then they saw it. A chewed-up frisbee. Weathered. Old. A frisbee that had been lost years ago, when Max was still in his first life. Sarah pressed a hand to her chest. "I remember that," she whispered. "Max lost it when he was 2. We searched for days." Ethan bent down, brushing the dirt off its surface. It was cracked in the middle, but still whole. Lily turned to Max. "You remembered," she whispered, eyes wide with wonder. Max barked happily, his tail wagging furiously. Michael let out a breathy laugh. Well, I guess that settles it. They all stood there, staring at the impossible proof in the dirt. Ethan finally picked up the frisbee and turned to Max, his heart full in a way it hadn't been in years. Go long, boy. Max's ears perked up. His body tensed with anticipation. Ethan threw the frisbee as far as he could. Max chased after it like he had never been gone. Like he had never left at all. And as the sun dipped lower in the sky, the Parker family watched him run, not as Buddy, but as Max. As he had always been. As he would always be. Some souls never truly leave. They just find their way home.